success almost without precedent. Honesty, one price, cash on delivery, and business on business principles were his invariable rules. Absolute regularity and system reigned in every department. In 50 years, he made a fortune of from $30 to $40 million. He was nominated as Secretary of the Treasury in 1869, but it was found that the law forbids a merchant to occupy that position. He offered to resign, or to give the entire profits of his business to the poor of New York, as long as he should remain in office. President Grant declined to accept such an offer. Poor Kepler struggled with constant anxieties, and told fortunes by astrology for a livelihood, saying that astrology, as the daughter of astronomy, ought to keep her mother. But fancy a man of science wasting precious time over horoscopes. "I supplicate you," he writes to Mesmer, "if there is a situation vacant at Tübingen, do what you can to obtain it for me, and let me know the prices of bread, wine, and other necessaries of life, for my wife is not accustomed to live on beans." He had to accept all sorts of jobs. He made almanacs and served anyone who would pay him. Who would have predicted that the modest, gentle boy, Raphael, without either riches or noted family, would have worked his way to such renown, or that one of his pictures, but 66 3/4 inches square, the Mother of Jesus, would be sold to the Empress of Russia for $66,000. His Ansidai Madonna was bought by the National Gallery for $350,000. Think of Michelangelo working for 6 florins a month, and 18 years on St. Peter's for nothing. Dr. Johnson was so afflicted with King's evil that he lost the use of one eye. The youth could not even engage in the pastimes of his mates, as he could not see the gutter without bending his head down near the street. He read and studied terribly. Finally, a friend offered to send him to Oxford, but he failed to keep his promise, and the boy had to leave. He returned home, and soon afterward his father died insolvent. He conquered adverse fortune and bodily infirmities with the fortitude of a true hero. Ichabod Washburn, a poor boy born near Plymouth Rock, was apprenticed to a blacksmith in Worcester, Mass., and was so bashful that he scarcely dared to eat in the presence of others. But he determined that he would make the best wire in the world, and would contrive ways and means to manufacture it in enormous quantities. At that time there was no good wire made in the United States. One house in England had the monopoly of making steel wire for pianos for more than a century. Young Washburn, however, had grit, and was bound to succeed. His wire became the standard everywhere. At one time he made 250,000 yards of iron wire daily, consuming 12 tons of metal, and requiring the services of 700 men. He amassed an immense fortune, of which he gave away a large part during his life, and bequeathed the balance to charitable institutions. John Jacob Astor left home at 17 to acquire a fortune. His capital consisted of $2 and 3 resolutions: to be honest, to be industrious, and not to gamble. 2 years later, he reached New York, and began work in a fur store at $2 a week and his board. Soon learning the details of the business, he began operations on his own account. By giving personal attention to every purchase and sale, roaming the woods to trade with the Indians, or crossing the Atlantic to sell his furs at a great profit in England, he soon became the leading fur dealer in the United States. His idea of what constitutes a fortune expanded faster than his acquisitions. At 50, he owned millions. At 60, his millions owned him. He invested in land, becoming in time the richest owner of real estate in America. Generous to his family, he seldom gave much for charity. He once subscribed $50 for some benevolent purpose, when one of the committee of solicitation said, "We did hope for more, Mr. Astor. Your son gave us $100. "Ah," chuckled the rich furrier, "William has a rich father. Mine was poor." Elihu Burritt wrote in a diary kept at Worcester, whither he went to enjoy its library privileges, such entries as these. Monday, June 18. Headache. 40 pages Cuvier's Theory of the Earth. 64 pages of French. 11 hours forging. Tuesday, June 19. 60 lines Hebrew. 30 Danish. 10 lines Bohemian. 9 lines Polish. 15 names of stars. 10 hours forging. Wednesday, June 20. 25 lines Hebrew, 8 lines Syriac, 11 hours forging. He mastered 18 languages and 32 dialects. He became eminent as the learned blacksmith, and for his noble work in the service of humanity. Edward Everett said of the manner in which this boy with no chance acquired great learning, "It is enough to make one who has had good opportunities for education hang his head in shame." "I was born in poverty," said Vice President Henry Wilson. "Want sat by my cradle. I know what it is to ask a mother for bread when she has none to give. I left my home at 10 years of age and served an apprenticeship of 11 years, receiving a month's schooling each year, and at the end of 11 years of hard work, a yoke of oxen and 6 sheep, which brought me $84. I never spent the sum of $1 for pleasure, counting every penny from the time I was born until I was 21 years of age. I know what it is to travel weary miles and ask my fellow men to give me leave to toil. In the first month after I was 21 years of age, I went into the woods, drove a team, and cut mill logs. I rose in the morning before daylight and worked hard till after dark, and received the magnificent sum of $6 for the month's work. Each of these dollars looked as large to me as the moon looks tonight." Many a farmer's son, says Thurlow Weed, has found the best opportunities for mental improvement in his intervals of leisure while tending sapbush. Such, at any rate, was my own experience. At night, you had only to feed the kettles and keep up the fires, the sap having been gathered and the wood cut before dark. During the day, we would always lay in a good stock of fat pine, by the light of which, blazing bright before the sugar house, in the posture the serpent was condemned to assume, as a penalty for tempting our first grandmother. I passed many a delightful night in reading. I remember in this way to have read a history of the French Revolution, and to have obtained from it a better and more enduring knowledge of its events and horrors, and of the actors in that great national tragedy, than I have received from all subsequent reading. I remember also how happy I was in being able to borrow the books of a Mr. Keyes after a 2-mile tramp through the snow, shoeless, my feet swaddled in remnants of rag carpet. "That fellow will beat us all some day," said a merchant speaking of John Wanamaker and his close attention to his work. What a prediction to make of a young man who started business with a little clothing and a handcart in the streets of Philadelphia. But this youth had the indomitable spirit of a conqueror in him, and you could not keep him down. General Grant said to George W. Childs, "Mr. Wanamaker could command an army." His great energy, method, industry, economy, and high moral principle attracted President Harrison, who appointed him Postmaster General. Jacques Aristide Boucicault began his business life as an employee in a dry goods house in a small provincial town in France. After a few years, he went to Paris, where he prospered so rapidly that in 1853 he became a partner and later the sole proprietor of the Bon Marché, then only a small shop, which became under his direction the most unique establishment in the world. His idea was to establish a combined philanthropic and commercial house on a large scale. Everyone who worked for him was advanced progressively, according to his length of employment and the value of the services he rendered. He furnished free tuition, free medical attendance, and a free library for employees, a provident fund affording a small capital for males and a marriage portion for females at the expiration of 10, 15 years of service, a free reading room for the public, and a free art gallery for artists to exhibit their paintings or sculptures. After his sudden death in 1877, his only son carried forward his father's projects until he too died in 1879, when his widow, Marguerite Guérin, continued and extended his business and beneficent plans until her death in 1887. So well did this family lay the foundations of a building covering 108,000 square feet, with many accessory buildings of smaller size, and of a business employing 3,600 persons, with sales amounting to nearly $20 million annually, that every department is still conducted with all its former success, in accordance with the instructions of the founders. They are here no longer in their bodily presence, but their spirit, their ideas still pervade the vast establishment. Everything is still sold at a small profit, and at a price plainly marked, and any article which may have ceased to please the purchaser can, without the slightest difficulty, be exchanged or its value refunded. When James Gordon Bennett was 40 years old, he collected all his property, $300, and in a cellar with a board upon 2 barrels for a desk, himself his own typesetter, office boy, publisher, newsboy, clerk, editor, proofreader, and printer's devil, he started the New York Herald. In all his literary work up to this time, he had tried to imitate Franklin's style, and, as is the fate of all imitators, he utterly failed. He lost 20 years of his life trying to be somebody else. He first showed the material he was made of in the salutatory of the Herald, viz., "Our only guide shall be good, sound, and practical common sense, applicable to the business and bosoms of men engaged in everyday life. We shall support no party, be the organ of no faction or coterie, and care nothing for any election or any candidate, from president down to constable. We shall endeavor to record facts upon every public and proper subject, stripped of verbiage and coloring, with comments when suitable, just, independent, fearless, and good-tempered." Joseph Hunter was a carpenter, Robert Burns a plowman, Keats a druggist, Thomas Carlyle a mason, Hugh Miller a stonemason. Rubens the artist was a page, Swedenborg a mining engineer, Dante and Descartes were soldiers. Ben Jonson was a bricklayer and worked at building Lincoln Inn in London with trowel in hand and a book in his pocket. Jeremy Taylor was a barber. Andrew Johnson was a tailor. Cardinal Wolsey was a butcher's son. So were Defoe and Kirk White. Michael Faraday was the son of a blacksmith. He even excelled his teacher, Sir Humphrey Davy, who was an apprentice to an apothecary. Virgil was the son of a porter, Homer of a farmer, Pope of a merchant, Horace of a shopkeeper, Demosthenes of a cutler, Milton of a money scrivener, Shakespeare of a wool stapler, and Oliver Cromwell of a brewer. John Wanamaker's first salary was $1.25 per week. A.T. Stewart began his business life as a school teacher. James Keene drove a milk wagon in a California town. Joseph Pulitzer, proprietor of the New York World, once acted as a stoker on a Mississippi steamboat. When a young man, Cyrus Field was a clerk in a New England store. George W. Childs was an errand boy for a bookseller at $4 a month. Andrew Carnegie began work in a Pittsburgh telegraph office at $3 a week. C.P. Huntington sold butter and eggs for what he could get a pound a dozen. Whitelaw Reid was once a correspondent of a newspaper in Cincinnati at $5 per week. Adam Forepaugh was once a butcher in Philadelphia. Sarah Bernhardt was a dressmaker's apprentice. Adelaide Nielsen began life as a child's nurse. Miss Braddon, the novelist, was a utility actress in the provinces. Charlotte Cushman was the daughter of poor people. Mr. W.O. Stoddard, in his Men of Business, tells a characteristic story of the late Leland Stanford. When 18 years of age, his father purchased a tract of woodland, but had not the means to clear it as he wished. He told Leland that he could have all he could make from the timber if he would leave the land clear of trees. A new market had just then been created for cordwood, and Leland took some money that he had saved, hired other choppers to help him, and sold over 2,000 cords of wood to the Mohawk and Hudson River Railroad at a net profit of $2,600. He used this sum to start him in his law studies, and thus, as Mr. Stoddard says, chopped his way to the bar. It is said that the career of Benjamin Franklin is full of inspiration for any young man. When he left school for good, he was only 12 years of age. At first, he did little but read. He soon found, however, that reading alone would not make him an educated man, and he proceeded to act upon this discovery at once. At school, he had been unable to understand arithmetic. Twice he had given it up as a hopeless puzzle, and finally left school almost hopelessly ignorant upon the subject. But the printer's boy soon found his ignorance of figures extremely inconvenient. When he was about 14, he took up for the third time the Cocker's arithmetic, which had baffled him at school, and ciphered all through it with ease and pleasure. He then mastered a work upon navigation, which included the rudiments of geometry, and thus tasted, quote, the inexhaustible charm of mathematics, unquote. He pursued a similar course, we are told, in acquiring the art of composition, in which, at length, he excelled most of the men of his time. When he was but a boy of 16,